dazzled by the ability that this young man had to spend money.
It's a curious feature that she didn't seem to be concerned that there was no tennis, but it may well have been that, in fact, that was another lie told by Brian.
They toured North America, going in no particular order to San Francisco, Miami, and to Barbados. The pretext of the trip, of course, was that Brian would be playing a tennis tournament in Miami, but he had to tell Amal that he couldn't play because the weather didn't suit it, and that's why the tournament was cancelled.
They enjoyed a very, very good lifestyle, a lifestyle no doubt in keeping with the vision that Brian had of himself as an international tennis player. At no stage did Amal have any clue that there was anything wrong with Brian's parents. On occasions, he pretended to get in touch with his parents. We've been able to recover the photographs that they took of the trip, and viewing those photographs, they're happy, they're smiling in all the various locations, and freed from perhaps the constraints of his parents. He made full use of it, he made full use of the cards, and he spent a vast amount of money in the course of those 2 weeks or so.
She said that there was never at any point any sense that he was under stress, distressed, nervous, anxious. So they had a whistle-stop tour of the high spots of America with no indication whatsoever of what he'd left behind, of the horror that he'd left behind.
Teenager Brian Blackwell has just enjoyed a £30,000 holiday of a lifetime to America with girlfriend Amal Saba. He'd used his dead parents' credit cards to pay for the trip, after killing them and leaving their bodies to rot at their home in Melling, Liverpool. With his unsuspecting girlfriend, Brian returns to the scene of the killings.
When Brian came back from America, he went straight back to his home. I personally think at this point he expected to see police activity around the house.
They were met by a neighbour who expressed some surprise that they didn't know Mr. and Mrs. Blackwell had gone to Spain. At that stage, it presented Brian with another opportunity to lie his way out of difficulty.
I went in that particular morning to pick the letters up, and I noticed his girlfriend was in front of the bungalow, and there was luggage on the floor. And I was amazed. I thought, oh, well, perhaps they've all come back. And I said, is Brian's mother and father back? And she said, we haven't been with them. She said, we've been separate. We've been to New York and they've gone to Spain. And then she shouted to Brian. He said, there's a neighbour here. Then he came back. He came from the side of the bungalow and he said, oh, hello, Gordon, you know. And I said, oh, hello, Brian. He said, I've just come to pick your letters up. He said, oh. And I mentioned the mother and father and he said they hadn't come back. And he couldn't get in the bungalow, he said, because he hadn't got a key.
He recovered the car from a garage, and he was invited to stay with Amal, which of course would have been fitted in, I think, with what he hoped she would ask him to do.
Brian did keep going back to the house, and sometimes he went with her, and she recalls him playing tennis against the back wall. She recalls him going into his father's stash of wine to bring some out to give to her mother as a thank you for having him. And he was behaving in basically a completely ordinary way.
Later on, what we did find, and quite unbelievably, was that Brian, in actual fact, had gone back and gone into the house himself. This was several weeks now after the bodies had been left there, and there was a great deal of decomposition of the bodies, and it was a fairly horrific scene. But Brian had gone back to the house and recovered certain photographs that he wanted, and also some posts that he felt that he would need. So he'd actually been into the house while the bodies were there in a very poor state.
He ignored their presence. He was unable to look at either his mum and dad, and he took some family mementos together with the hammer which had been used to strike his father, which peculiarly he kept.
Brian Blackwell carried on as if nothing had happened. On August the 19th, 2004, more than 3 weeks after the killings, he picked up his long-awaited exam results.
On A-level day, when Brian came in to pick up his A-levels, he was very much like many of the other students who were there on that day. seemed to be happy and excited by the results that he'd received. He'd achieved straight A grades, so obviously he was going on to where he hoped to go to. And when I spoke to him, he seemed to be normally happy, rather like the rest of the students on the day.
Indeed, rather cruelly, when the day came for him to receive his A-level results, he complained that his parents had in some way let him down by not being there for when the results came. And of course only Brian knew that his parents were in no position to join in his success on that day. Brian had a problem because he knew that the bodies of his parents still lay in the house undetected. And the longer that went on, the greater the problem was going to be. And at one stage he actually went into Kirby, which is quite close to his parents' property, and he approached two young men, offered them money to burn the house down. Again, he must have thought in his own mind that that was a perfectly proper thing to do. It was a way of getting rid of the problem. But so arrogant was he that he never gave any thought to the rather curious figure he would cut on the streets of Kirby. He stood out straight away from the way he was dressed, the way he spoke, as not being a local. And in fact, the two lads that he spoke to, one of them thought he was an undercover police officer. He told them that he wanted a house burnt down. He told them that the house belonged to a drug dealer, and he'd had difficulties with the drug dealer, and he wanted revenge. At no stage did either of those two lads believe there was any truth whatsoever in the deal that Brian was putting to them.
Thinking the Blackwells were on holiday at their villa in Spain, neighbour Pete Boyle became concerned at the build-up of mail in the front porch, which had been left open. He decided to go to his neighbour's house and post the mail through the letterbox.
And it was only then when I picked up the mail and I lifted the flap up, which was obviously an airtight flap, and the smell came out. And it was when I stepped back and I looked at the door, and it was strange really, because we hadn't neither my daughter or I, we hadn't noticed it when we were walking up.